Hello and welcome to this new video. My name is Bas and today I am going to go through various aspects of my healing journey and the framework that I used to navigate it and which grew out of my journey. I do want to remind you all that this is my framework with my concepts and that it is about that. These are concepts talking about experiences, so don't take this frame too rigidly. The essence of it is much more important than the form of the frame itself with its specific symbols. It is my own jargon to talk about these ideas and experiences. Similarly, my practices are specific to myself. We all have to, in the end, walk our own path, yet we can learn from others. As such, while I share this with all of you, don't take this as me telling you what to do or anything of the sort. You're your own person, and there is this wisdom within you as well. But when it now comes to, this particular path that I've been walking the past 3 years, well, the first thing I want to highlight about this path is that whilst it is deeply influenced by the Orphic and Dionysian mysteries next to the Koryos warrior tradition and shamanistic practices, it is its own unique thing, so it's not really any of these other things in of itself, what I mentioned, and as such should not be seen as a reconstruction of any particular existing path. And next to this, a big part of the framework comes from both Jungian and Orphic thought as well. However, with a focus on a more earlier Dionysian and Proto-Indo-European understanding. As the Orphic mysteries had certain ascetic practices that are not part of, my own journey. And as such, it shares some similarities with tantric practices, particularly in its emphasis on embracing the full spectrum of human experience, including the physical, emotional, and spiritual aspects of life. And as such, this path is about the integration of opposites and the harnessing of various energies, including those associated with desire and passion, as a means of spiritual transformation. And it also involves a deep engagement with the body and the senses, where this path rejects the notion of transcending the material world or, that being the only goal. It's really about embracing the world fully and finding divinity within the world. Kind of rise up and above it, but also at the same time, come back down into the body. And it's really about living authentically and cultivating a sense of presence and awareness in everyday life. And before I want to go deeper into the Orphic and Jungian-inspired framework and my own journey through these various stages of development, and really my ongoing journey within it, I want to highlight a few things. Firstly, many aspects that are talked about within this video are further explained more in depth in both my History of Consciousness course and my book Alchemy of the Psyche, which shed more light on various theoretical aspects of this journey. And it's also really, helpful to give one a better in-depth understanding of the frame connected to the journey I will later talk about. Next to the entire Mystery School playlist that I created that is connected to this video as well. If you just watching this more in a standalone sense, there's this on the YouTube channel, the Moment podcast, where there's this mystery school playlist where I will be adding many more videos to it, and there are many more videos that shed light on various aspects that I won't be going, into here, because this is more of an introduction. But when it comes to the history of consciousness course, for instance, which is available on Patreon, starting at €5, well, it goes into things such as the structure of the psyche from a Jungian lens, the age of Cancer, connected to, for instance, the Great Mother and Göbekli Tepe, the age of Gemini, connected to the Koryos and Arctea that I go into there, the age of Taurus, where I go into Ma'at in Egypt, the age of Aries, where I go into things such as the Eleusinian mysteries, the Orphic and Mitraic mysteries, next to different hero myths and wind horse, which connects to the Buddhistic wind horse, which I also have a video about on the YouTube channel for free as well. And then next, the age of Pisces, going into the Arthurian myth, Virgin Mary and witches, to, give a few examples, but also, different aspects, such as the dancing plagues and kind of what's going on there with the second fish, that Jung also talked about. And finally, going into modernity and really the loss of myth and meaning, but also, going into some sense of a culmination of the various things that I looked at to, try to piece together something. And the history of consciousness course, in that sense, was my first attempt of, creating this frame. And even though it's not perfect, it does give a very good foundational knowledge regarding, this frame that I'm going to talk about within this video. Where my book, Alchemy of the Psyche, well, that one really complements the history of consciousness course itself, and with that also very much this particular frame, as it goes into various aspects of that in a more, theoretical but also semi-practical manner as well, regarding some of these rituals, and very highlighting the historical foundation, one could call it, of this frame that I'm gonna talk about. Going into the Jungian concepts, the scapegoat and societal shadow dynamics, the Neolithic base that it is kind of founded upon, the Proto-Indo-Europeans, which also links to Three-Toe, the Divine Twins, and the Koryos, and kind of the different manifestations of the Koryos throughout different Indo-European cultures. The Arctea linked to Artemis, the sovereignty goddess, and kind of the different manifestations of that, and linking that back to the Neolithic figure. And also, going through different mystery skulls, and again, like Wind Horse and the Subtle Body, but also very much about the return of the self, and kind of piecing all of these different aspects together much more than I've done in the history of consciousness course, to really highlight these different aspects of the scapegoat complex that kind of creates this sense of shadow projection and polarization, and kind of this kind of dualistic black and white kind of thinking. And Alchemy of the Psyche very much highlights, how to get out of that, out of this scapegoat complex, out of this kind of victim accuser kind of dynamic, to get out of that. But really, yeah, like I said, Alchemy of the Psyche and the History of Consciousness course very much, complement each other. They, go into different aspects of the same journey, as much as, this video and the Mystery Skull playlist itself also goes into different aspects. So I know that Mystery School playlist also complements these paid sources of information as well. So one can already, in that sense, go through the Mystery School playlist and learn from that on its own too. And there's many more things outside of what I've put together as well that one can look at. Like Carl Jung itself, like his writings, for instance, and the writings of other individuals that can help one to gain a better understanding of this kind of journey, and kind of also see how this applies to one's own journey. Because even though there's elements, of this journey for myself that is kind of like similar in some aspect, of like, the similar essence of it, like how it exactly plays out is different. And as such, there really is a need to, think critically about it, and to kind of see like, well, how does this kind of play out, and how does this kind of apply to my own journey. But yeah, in the Mystery School playlist, I do go into, various aspects as well, going into different aspects of the shadow, the common, repressed aspects of the psyche, such as the negative parental complexes, aspects of the collective shadow, the scapegoat archetype as well. Next to going into the Koryos practice and the Archeia practice, and in depth into soul loss and retrieval in a very practical manner. Giving very practical insights into the journey, highlighting a particular journey that I went on. Even though I did go on many more journeys than just one journey, it's not that simple. And there's a lot of processing and much more connected to it than just a simple solution of one does a journey and one is done kind of deal. So one has to keep that one in mind though. Where, finally the Lupercalia and Dionysus videos very much shed more light onto these ancient archetypal patterns that were relevant for my journey, giving one a deeper, understanding of these different archetypal patterns which apply to this particular journey that I went on. The Lupercalia, in a deeper sense, being linked to the sovereignty goddess and the reintegration phase of both internal and external aspects. Where finally the Dionysus video goes in depth into the figure of Dionysus and its connection to individuation, death, and rebirth, shedding more light into the figures of Yemu, Zagreus, and Dionysus, next to the deeper interconnectedness of the Orphic frame within its more original Proto-Indo-European nature. And as such, approaching the same journey from a mythological and spiritual frame with Jungian analysis intertwined, where this video itself will go more in depth into the more personal aspects of my journey and how it intertwines with the kingdom of Ouranos, Kronos, Zeus, and Dionysus. And each of these kingdoms representing different stages of psychological and spiritual development, going from unconscious wholeness, fragmentation, shadow work, anima work, to integration and spiritual transformation. And very much this journey should not be mistaken as a rigid frame to be adhered to, but as one path that can give one inspiration on one's own journey. And I really want to reiterate this, each journey is unique and we can't force our own journey onto others. Tell them what to do. Oh, just do these things or do these other things over there. We can only hope to inspire others with the journey that we're going on and the framework we're using. But in the end, it's very much more about being the source of inspiration, and very much the goal should be to encourage, well, really everyone, and empower everyone to come up with one's own particular frame. And one might be inspired to use aspects of what I talk about in, my own journey, which is fine. But, we do have to understand that my journey is unique to, my particular situation, as much as, your journey is unique to your own situation, even though there are particular similarities. The details and exactly how it plays out is not the same. And we really shouldn't try to kind of pretend as if it is, because it is not, even though there are certain elements that are same in essence. But it's not exactly the same. But when it now comes to this framework, well, very much it starts off, and it kind of does for people generally when it comes to spiritual and, psychological development in the kingdom of Ouranos, how I very much coined it based on the Orphic mysteries. And he is the first deity to rule the cosmos in the cosmogony of ancient Greece. And Ouranos represents the night sky, representing the unconscious mind from a Jungian lens. And as the first ruler of the cosmos, he is associated with the primal, untamed forces of nature. And within life, as young children, we start off in this state of initial wholeness, which is not yet refined, and deeply instinctual and Dionysian in nature, where we are connected to our instincts, emotions, and body. And we can also link this to Hestia as well. Hestia being the virgin goddess of the heart and home, and, being known for her serene and pure nature. She very much was the goddess of peace and stability, and was often invoked at the beginning and end of rituals to ensure their success. And Hestia's purity should not be seen in that sense of purity in some kind of like self-denying, kind of instinct-denying sense, more in the sense of an uncorrupted and uncontaminated state of being, which precedes the creation of the shadow. So it's more about that it flows naturally without there being the sense of restriction on it. It's the free flowing of libido in a natural manner, which is kind of the sense of purity that's meant with this, instead of like this kind of weird distortion of the sense of purity being this denial of the body. But regarding Hestia, her association with the heart also connects her further to the idea of the sacred flame, which represents the inner light or spirit that resides within each individual. And in that sense, the kingdom of Ouranos represents the initial state of wholeness, the raw, undifferentiated state from which the personal development begins. Think here also the wild man and woman in touch with instinct. However, life is messy. Things can cause trauma next to there being in our culture and society aspects we are conditioned to repress and deny in ourselves. And to paraphrase Maggie Anthony, as she's been, pointing out within that book, as time goes on, our parents and our society teach us to repress our instinctual desires. And some of these teachings, given harshly or with impatience, induce us to repress those needs. At the point when we hit our teenage years, without any rituals of the ancient cultures for us to transform into adults, this is where our society is breaking down. This is when some of the more negative alternatives begin to surface. Drugs, alcohol, overeating, and increasingly in the teen and preteen years, well, I would say depression, suicidal tendencies, and a general decline of mental health. And that is because, through our disconnection from instinct, we're also at the same time cut off from the inner life force itself as well. And with that, the fragmentation of the self, or the wholeness also begins, which leads into the kingdom of Kronos. And the kingdom of Kronos represents the state of division and separation. And this stage is characterized by a sense of confusion, chaos, and uncertainty, but also with the idea of control. And within this stage, one may feel a sense of disconnection from the spiritual realm, or, we could call it the unconscious. And this can also, come with an experience of grief, loss, and despair as well that we can fall into. And when it comes to Kronos, in the three sky cosmological model, he's very much the celestial phenomena linking the nightly and daily skies, kind of a binder god. Yet, when it now comes to Kronos, he's also tied to serpentine symbolism as well, pointing towards his original nature as an uninhibited libido figure, representing power and fertility, where, with the establishment of civilization and societal order, he became associated with law, order, and social taboos, as such becoming a sort of paradox, making the figure as a symbol of source of libido into a figure that becomes a source of its restriction. And in that sense, Kronos' restriction of the primal forces of Ouranos and his castration really signifies the ego's attempt to regulate and control the instinctual drives. And in the worst case scenario, when this happens, Kronos becomes the negative animus of the terrible mother, as thus becoming a symbol of the negative parental complexes, which I talk more about in revealing the shadows, parental complexes, and myth, causes, and behaviors. And this state of being which the kingdom of Kronos represents is one of fragmentation in both an internal and external manner, where parts within us are repressed and fragmented, yet also externally these same parts are demonized and declared taboo, without there being an acknowledgement of the potential positive aspects associated with these aspects. And sure, the these destructive aspects are also part of it. Yet at the same time, it's all about how we guide and work together with the various aspects of the psyche. But what we can see is that, this state of being connected to a general unconsciousness, which is the more general mainstream state prevalent within society, where life starts to feel as if strung along a pattern of fate, which one seemingly can't escape. And through this, generally, we feel in this phase of the journey a sense of inner turmoil and feeling overwhelmed by the complexity of the self, and with it, the complexity of life. There also being a tendency to project negative emotions and feelings onto others, with there being a need for control, which is projected outwardly. However, we at some point within this state have what is called the dark night of the soul, and this is the stage of dissolution and darkness, where one as individual experiences a sense of breakdown and disintegration. And it is often associated with the symbolism of death, decay, decomposition, destruction, the shadow, the ravens, and the dragon. But within this video, I don't want to just go, into these more theoretical aspects. I also really want to go into the more lived experience of going through these different stages as well. So to really give some context, whilst I do go much deeper into my past in the video, from pain to purpose, my journey, the podcast and community, here I want to really focus on the starting point of my journey itself, which occurred after I had already been dealing with PTSD, depression, anxiety, and at times feeling suicidal, next to struggling with feelings of loneliness, a fear of abandonment, and low self-worth. With the PTSD including flashbacks, intrusive thoughts, and emotional numbness. And at this point in the journey, I had repressed most memories of my past, such as my childhood, teenage years, and also the traumatic memories linked to it, such as bullying, feelings of societal rejection, and having internalized a scapegoat role, which also very much ties into the video The Psychology of the Hikikomori, as I have lived throughout childhood through early adulthood very much isolated from society, not having really friends or feeling part of anything. And even though I tried to ignore it and try to participate in society, nonetheless I was internally not doing well, feeling empty and generally cut off from instinct, my emotions, and the core essence of my being. And this being connected to the kingdom of Kronos and its internal fragmentation. But despite this, I tried to do my best to do, what my family and society expected of me, to succeed and go after the dream society wants one to go after. So I did. I worked hard, was climbing the corporate ladder, and eventually even bought a home next to being married. But at the same time, something did not feel right. So next to the jobs I did, I started to work on my first book that eventually became Rise of the Shaman, to very much try to figure out what is going on. As, like I said, something did not feel right. And after, through Jordan Peterson, having been introduced to Carl Jung, I started to delve into what was going on with, the culture war as well. Yet for me, this soon went into self-help, where through a friend, I became slowly aware that certain memories I had from the past were not as normal as I thought, which started the process of digging into the concept of the shadow, anima, and attachment styles for me. And then when 2020 hit and the pandemic happened, well, to be honest, for me, it was not much of a difference, as I kind of was already used to the distancing, or kind of the isolation, I would maybe better call it. However, it was in that year where my body basically screamed stop, and I broke down. And the connected emotions that came up during that time, well, I can say they were rather challenging and overwhelming. Going from crying to despair, hopelessness, agony, and very much a pain that, from what I remember very clearly, because it's really been etched into my brain. Kind of pain that had me back to the gods, kind of like to make it stop. But then at the same time kind of feeling forsaken kind of by everything. So very much a dark night of the soul. Very much, before this already to some degree, I started to get very obsessed about Dionysus, the divine twins, so Romulus and Remus, for instance, the Koryos and Artemis as well. So there was already an initial kind of obsession about these kind of themes, next to me looking into Carl Jung and Jordan Peterson to some degree. And for me, really, at the time, what I was going through was, in one dream, very well symbolized as well. In that particular dream, I was standing on a cliff with a dead tree on it, where out of the forest came Athena with a spear, shield, and owl on her shoulder. And the brown owl then flew off, and Athena started to charge at me, where I walked backwards, but before I knew it, I hung from the tree, pierced through my heart by the spear, where Artemis came running from inside the forest and stood in front of me facing Athena, where after that Athena took the spear out and just decided to leave, with Artemis carrying me into the forest. As in the meantime, I had fallen to the ground and started to bleed from the heart. And for me, really, this dream marked the beginning of my journey. Very much highlighting for me the wounding of the seed of the soul. Everything I had been carrying all this time. And it was around this same time that my marriage ended. I lost my job and ended up selling my home and most of my belongings. Which is at the same time when I started with practices such as journaling, shadow work, meditation, and introspection. Where I ended up leaving my home country of the Netherlands and ended up in Finland, where my then current girlfriend was from. And soon after, I started to become interested in shamanism, and then also found a drum maker next to joining the Three Worlds Shamanism community, where first, mostly I really was just testing out the drum and figuring out how to use it to go into trance. Though I do have to say that my quote-unquote shamanic practice is very much my own and has nothing really in common with any existing form of practice. It's not really core shamanism, and it's also very much not traditional shamanism either. And at the same time, I was doing dream analysis as well, where there were both dreams connected to the shadow, but also connected to the anima as well, linked to repressed emotions and shadow content. The shadow representing the darker unconscious aspects of the personality, including repressed emotions, desires, and traits that one may find undesirable or unacceptable. And within the framework, the next symbolic kingdom is the kingdom of Zeus, which also is connected to the Orphic mysteries as well. And this kingdom representing the ethical and moral development and being associated with the idea of wisdom, guidance, and inner harmony. Very much representing the process of purification, self-awareness, and the start of the integration of the shadow aspects of the self. Zeus overcoming the twilight of Kronos and setting up a different kind of relationship between the society and the individual, more based on justice and a focus on cultivating an internal morality in people rather than trying to enforce from the outside. So trying to get to a more self-controlled form of libido expression, which is not self-denying or tyrannical, but more about learning how to deal with one's impulses through discipline whilst letting it flow in a conscious manner. And as such, this stage is characterized by a growing sense of clarity, understanding, and self-awareness. And also very much about understanding and purifying the different aspects of the self. And as such, very much associated with purification and self-discovery, where there's a slow sense of inner growth and also a sense of inner strength and resilience that's being, cultivated with this. Where the individual confronts their own illusions and biases and strives towards greater clarity and insight. Though at the same time, there are some negative emotions associated with this stage as well, which reflect the sense of disillusionment and frustration that can arise when old beliefs and assumptions are challenged and confronted. And it is within this particular phase of development where one can also notice a shift to a focus on the present moment rather than dwelling on the past or future, where there being a growing willingness to confront and work through difficult emotions and issues internally. Though there can be a tendency towards perfectionism or idealism within this phase as well, which is kind of part of the phase itself. These kind of things happen. One should not beat oneself up about it. Though, there's also a general need for Anima Work still in this phase as well, which sees the development of the anima into the mystical twin, quote-unquote, figure common to many anima dreams and stories. But this development very much also depends on the dignity of the male ego, its ability to relate to love and cultivate a sense of relationship with this inner aspect of oneself. And it is this particular desire, which is essentially a projection, a transfer, is what shapes, the anima figure. And as such, the ego projects its hidden and in some ways better self onto it. And the shape of the anima is derived from this projection. And as this process unfolds, the ego, in love with what is essentially the projection of its unrealized qualities, is drawn to the anima figure, where gradually, as the work progresses and one does not get stuck in a drowning fascination with the figure, the individual is able to absorb more and more of these projected traits into one's conscious personality. And very much one of the main lessons of anima work is that true strength and heroism comes more from right action and not from some artificial endowment. And very much the lesson here is the sacrifice of dependence, and very much about learning that we can bond with others without owning them or becoming dependent on them for our own sense of self. And when it now, comes to my own journey within this particular phase, well, eventually, started to build up the courage to do shamanic journeys. And did my first journey where I went into an ash desert underworld setting to face the deepest core issues that I was suffering from, which was connected to negative parental complexes and the repression of the inner child who had to eat ash as sustenance, which very much tied to the repression of the inner child aspects of the psyche, where in another journey I rescued my anima that was locked up deep within a cave, bruised and in a fetal position. These two journeys being the more important ones that I had taken. Though there were other journeys regarding different inner aspects that were fragmented, such as different inner child aspects. And they're also being split in the anima next to the inner child being split into 4 parts. But it really was through me doing these shamanic journeys and continuing with dream analysis, the Koryos rituals in the woods, looking into my past, writing down memories that surfaced, to piece it together more and more, next to emotional processing, analyzing my behaviors and relating patterns, and finally looking at my personal myth and self-concept, that I could start to slowly process my past and really work through the trauma. Where with the self-concept, I looked at things such as roles and interests, self-esteem, self-image, qualities and characteristics, the ideal self, self-efficacy and social identity, and kind of looked at how my past connected to the self-concept and kind of like trying to transform the self-concept over time. Where with my past, I first, like I said, managed to piece it all together as much as I could. Where I then, once I had done that, I could start to analyze it for archetypal patterns, where for me the scapegoat archetype played an important role. Where next to that, for me, looking at the relating patterns really boiled down to learning about attachment styles, to spot these behaviors in myself and try to address the underlying emotions and traumas driving these behaviors, which also connected to emotional processing next to learning techniques to regulate my nervous system, which I go much deeper into in my video called Soul Loss and Retrieval, practical guide, where I also go deeper into the process of emotional processing, the retrieval of different aspects and their reintegration, which was facilitated by the Anima, where first I had to try my best to be there for these different aspects of myself on my own, whilst facing the emotions that started to come up. And this involved acknowledging and working through repressed emotions, trauma, and also psychological complexes, which are very much, you can see them as core beliefs or kind of like scripts that are held together by emotions and memories that are generating particular behaviors in us. Where Qigong, but also past mindfulness practice that I had done already way before this and before 2020 even, were key in cultivating the state of being where I would not be averse or attached to these emotions, which also included working through people-pleasing dynamics as well, where the Koryos practice allowed me to cultivate assertiveness, which was also a key factor in reclaiming my own personal power and autonomy. The Koryos being the Proto-Indo-European warrior band connected to wolves, wilderness, death, instinct, and discipline. And in my video, Koryos and Dionysius, you can also learn a bit more about my practice as well, which allowed me to integrate the primal side of human nature, though I do hope to make a video about rituals itself as well, where I go much deeper into this aspect of my practice. But the ancient Greek Corybantes and their ecstatic practices were next to that also a very important source of inspiration as well, connected to the nurturing of the divine child, Dionysus. So the birth of the second Dionysus as divine child, which is the symbolic emerging of the self-child. So the self-child being the potentiality present within the self, the self that starts to emerge from that, out of this kind of fragmentation. Next to the merging of the split anima into a singular figure, instead of being split between emotions and sexuality, which, had been caused by the negative mother complex. And during this process, repressed emotions and unconscious aspects of the psyche also came to the surface, to be integrated into consciousness. And I can very much say, that this is a very challenging process, as it requires facing and working through very painful and uncomfortable emotions and experiences that were, previously repressed or denied. But it is, by doing this that slowly we can start to, put all of these different pieces together. Similarly, that was the case with the Anima as well. And regarding the Anima, there's also different stages of development connected to this figure as well. The first one being the projection stage, which is characterized by a dependency on women for emotional well-being, with the Anima merged with one's personal mother, where the second stage is called the attraction stage, which introduces intense attraction and desire directed towards a particular woman, where, one ends up projecting one's idealized qualities onto this woman, perceiving her as the embodiment of one's deepest desires and aspirations, where then the internalization stage signifies a shift from external projection to a more internalized and personal connection with the feminine, becoming aware of anima projection and possession. And when one then, progresses further, the anima then starts to take on the role of wisdom and intuitive insight in the wisdom stage, where, one develops a more conscious and balanced relationship with the feminine, integrating intuition and creativity into one's personality. One that is more of a flowy kind of creativity. It's easier to be creative in that sense. There's more of a flow there instead of dealing with these blockages. Where the final stage is the integration stage, where the anima serves as a mediator between the conscious and unconscious realms, offering a psychological space for individuals to confront and assimilate the shadow elements within. And it is generally during this stage that one's attention is focused on the integration of one's inner and outer self and the balancing of opposing forces within oneself. The focus then very much becomes about developing a deeper understanding of the self and the world, and finding ways to integrate spiritual principles into daily life as well. And in this process, the anima plays a significant role. The anima, representing the feminine aspect of the psyche in man, then starts to undergo a transformation as it merges with consciousness. And this union leads to the integration and balance of both feminine and masculine qualities within the individual. And as such, the anima moves from being an unconscious, autonomous figure to become this inner guide and mediator, between, like I said, the conscious and unconscious. And in this integrated and aligned state, with the conscious self, the anima very much represents the source of creativity, intuition, and wisdom. Next to also being connected to a sense of healing and revitalization as well. And very much, she serves as this bridge to the deeper aspects of the unconscious, and also helps in the process of self-discovery and transformation, which also, moves us closer to the cultivation of a greater capacity for empathy, emotional depth, and a balanced expression, of various qualities that we possess.
Είδετεν χωρών Ολύμπη, επιτέκληταν πέμπετε χαρήν Θεοί, ολιβατονίτα στέος ομφαλών θείο έντα έντες ιερές αθάνες.
Which naturally then also leads us into the kingdom of Dionysus, which represents the process of integration and spiritual transformation. And within this kingdom, the anima has already been realized as this inner figure. And, there being this increasing movement towards the coming together of opposites whilst going closer towards the self. And symbolically, this is the emergence of the third Dionysus, the transcendent function in a Jungian lens, which plays the role of this autonomous regulator that, then emerges and gradually begins to work as the process of individuation, starts to unfold more and more. Very much being the third emerging from the struggle of the two, which is the coming together of the celestial nature of Zeus associated with discipline, consciousness, the self-controlled form of libido expression, with the revitalizing, regenerative, transformational, and vital energies from the earthly and chthonic realms associated with the sovereignty goddess. And this stage is characterized by a sense of inner peace, self-acceptance, and a sense of wholeness, where one may feel a sense of inner wisdom and may be able to understand and integrate the complexities of the self. And as such, one may experience a sense of inner harmony and balance. And also, feel this sense of connection to the spiritual realm as well. It is when a person starts to integrate the polarities within themselves that external imposed morality becomes less relevant, because the person has a more holistic understanding of themselves and their own morality. And this integration allows the individual to access their own inner wisdom and guidance, leading to a more compassionate and authentic expression of morality that comes from within, which leads to a more harmonious relationship between the conscious and unconscious aspects of the self, which also then allows the individual to live a more authentic life. And after the stage, the journey, continues with further stages of transformation. As the journey doesn't end there. And I do want to highlight that the specific progression and experiences can vary for each individual. But in essence, it's very much a continuous process of integration focused on deepening and maturing the connection, to the aspects that one started to connect to earlier within the journey. And it is normally characterized by a sense of inner aliveness, vitality, and a heightened awareness of one's true nature. As an individual, one starts to experience a greater connection with one's authentic self and a sense of purpose and meaning in life. As an individual, we're gonna, go through further challenges and confrontations in life. As such, within one's unconscious, there's always going to be new unresolved aspects that we're, facing, even though we can start to face these aspects with a greater sense of self-awareness and resilience that we have cultivated already way earlier within this journey itself. And we keep kind of cultivating. And these new unresolved aspects that can come up, can be due to potential conflicts between the inner and outer reality. For instance, there's a particular situation with a friend or something, and you don't want to see it. So then you repress that into the shadow, and you kind of try to deny that. Well, that can again create an inner conflict. But when we then kind of resolve that, then we can move back to this state of inner peace again. Even though we kind of have this state of inner peace. But yeah, it's kind of about continuously kind of adhering to kind of this and aligning to this authentic self and essence within, and kind of having to continuously kind of do that and cultivate that deeper and deeper. And that's very much a process that keeps happening. But if we now would look at the journey in a more zoomed out manner, it really started off with me trying to become aware of the patterns that played out in my life. And eventually I started to understand the pattern that was playing out and how the unconscious was guiding this journey. What you can see here within this particular slide. What I really have started to understand is that, back in 2020, kind of was unconsciously called to leave society and go on this Koryos journey, practicing ecstatic and shamanistic type of rituals, which is when the transcendent functions started to emerge in the form of the divine child and wise old man. So, the divine child archetype, for me, represented by the infant Dionysus, symbolizing the potential for renewal, creativity, and spiritual rebirth, where the wise old man was represented by Wotan, the archetypal warrior energy embodying courage, strength, and the willingness to confront inner and outer challenges. And throughout that journey, I worked on bringing together various fragmented pieces of my psyche whilst processing through, these connected, repressed emotions. And this process involved nurturing and healing the wounded aspects of the psyche and fostering a more harmonious relationship between the conscious and unconscious realms, where Wotan, Dionysus, and the sovereignty goddess, very much became important figures within this journey for me. Where I was, in the end, not only trying to piece together the inner child and anima, but also very much try to work through the split of scapegoat and redeemer, where the sovereignty goddess, played an important part in helping to bring together the different aspects that needed to be mended within the scapegoat complex. The sovereignty goddess representing the archetype of feminine wisdom, nurturing, and sovereignty. And this stage very much for me involved resolving inner conflicts and reconciling polarities, such as the scapegoat-redeemer split. And the symbolic merging of Dionysus and Zagreus very much represents the person unifying various aspects of the self, embracing both the ecstatic and transformative qualities of Dionysian energy and the regenerative power symbolized by Zagreus. The split between the underworld twin and the celestial aspect of the psyche, which also connects to the merging of Zagreus and Dionysus that I talk about in the video Dionysus Resurrected. And very much the culmination of this individuation process is the realization of the self, symbolized by Bacchus. Bacchus here representing the integrated and whole individual who has embraced the full spectrum of their being, including both light and shadow aspects. The self embodying a sense of wholeness, authenticity, and inner harmony. But when it now really comes to this journey I've been on, well, this has been for me a 3-year-long period of exploration and integration where I spent most of my time on doing inner work next to learning as much as I could to heal myself, looking at mythology, Jungian psychology, mystery school teachings, philosophy, and other aspects, including practices that help me with being connected to my emotions next to the body. And this does not mean that, there won't be any more adversity or we will live in some general sense of inner peace all the time, without there being any emotions. The journey through life has these ups and downs. And the emotions we might tend to label as negative, and those we prefer and label as positive. But what we do have to keep in mind is that these labels are constructed notions that don't really exist, as they are internal perceptions and thoughts based on aversion and attachment. In the end, it is about cultivating a deeper relationship with ourselves, the unconscious and with it the body and emotions. And this is thus not only about a mental and pure psychological process, but one that requires a practice of embodiment. To, through these Dionysian and Venusian mysteries, bring down the soul into the body without it being caught up in unconscious ego identifications to aspects that are not truly us. And as such, my path differs from what most try to achieve. It is not one of just transcendence in the sense of a movement away from the world, but about anchoring the soul and with it the divine into the world, to be fully present in the here and now within our body and with the various emotions and experiences we have, without a sense of judgment and with a sense of compassion and understanding for oneself and others. It is very much about walking on the razor's edge between embodied emotional and instinctual existence without being caught up in the experience itself in some form of unconscious identification. A middle way between giving ourselves to our desires without consciousness and the denying of desires and the unconscious.